Okay, I'm going to give a tutorial on what is considered a conflict critical perspective. I'm going to try to chew on some major theorists that come from a conflict critical perspective. I like using visual examples as a way to get us to think how conflict critical theorists would argue or analyze about inequalities. Remember that this is different from a functionalist perspective. Functionalist perspectives are different than from conflict critical perspectives. So let's go ahead and move to the next. These are just some of the theorists that are usually associated. I'm not going to have time to talk about Herbert Gans. I talked about him in a previous podcast, but I'm going to take out some time to talk about Marxian perspectives, Max Weber, and intersectional perspectives as well. Okay, I guess again I like using pictures to think about conflict perspectives, whether we're thinking about the importance of class in American society or any other industrial society, white collar work, blue collar work, right, service sector work, and the importance of work in society. And also conflict that's often visible when it comes to wage differences, right, and income differences as a result of having to work in particular kinds of settings. So this is where I kind of introduce some concepts to help us think about maybe this is a way how conflict critical thinkers point out the inequalities in society. I like using the concept by Sicard Nickel. He coined the phrase refeudalization. And just to give you some statistics here, you can see that the CEO pay and the average compensation of U.S. workers, this has accelerated. So there's more and more inequality between CEOs of major companies and the workers. So there's a major divide. Another example of refeudalization is probably more recent. When I made this tutorial, an example, Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, he was conducting the draft in one of his yachts, which is reported to be worth about $250 million. So it is definitely an example of excessive differences of salaries that some people are able to accumulate, vastly different from working class people. Right? There's another example of this. I like using the chess metaphor as a way to think about power and status in society and money, importance of money. But a lot of these thoughts really go back to these two individuals, Marx and Engels, in a manifesto kind of theorized on this class struggle between two sort of antagonistic classes. So many sociologists, if they come from a conflict tradition, will still think class is a salient concept. It's a very important concept in especially modern society, right? But also during the Industrial Revolution, right? But class is still a very important concept. Now I'm going to move a little further now. So a lot of people, they like using class analysis, which is most easy, right? You just conducted an analysis based on class. However, some conflict thinkers will also go into areas like political economy. So I always like chewing on the old kind of concept theory that Marx develops, which is called the reserve army of labor theory. He tries to give his analysis why unemployment is kind of a problem in capitalism. And he argues that if you observe within the logic of capitalism itself, no capitalist wants to, employ every individual in the world, so there's a constant surplus population, which is always unemployed. And sometimes capitalists want this so they can cherry pick from a large pool of laborers, and it can press down the price, right? Press down the price of wages. This is a classic theory, kind of Marx develops. Later people expand on this with the global reserve army of labor problem dimension, that where globally this problem is more visible with global capitalism. So that's just some few Marxian concepts, including the class theory and this theory, which are very popular. So let me move on now to Weber. Weber is not as vulgar as Marx. Weber offers a kind of multidimensional view of stratification. So he has this famous three-dimensional view of class, status, and power, that you can't just blame it all on economic class. There are other dimensions of stratification, right? So class, in a sense, is still upper class, middle class, working class, right? Your location within the mode of production. But if you think about something like status, think of occupations, even in modern society, like coaches, right? High school coaches or judges. Their position is like in between, and there's a lot of cultural respect that's attributed to those kind of occupations that may not have that much to do with economic dimensions. The third dimension he talked about is power or party affiliation, right? So in modern society, the political elite also have a kind of power. So the way that Weber wants us to look at stratification is through this three-way kind of dimension. There's these three aspects that we need to consider, right? That explain stratification. Okay, now I'm going to try to explain intersectional theory, which is a feminist perspective, which has similarity between this multidimensional perspective that we just heard from Weber. Traditionally, I think it was developed in 1980s, late 80s, third wave feminism. And it's usually class, race, and gender were kind of looked at, and how these dimensions of class, right, race, whether you are black or Latino, right, indigenous or non-white, and then also gender dimensions, right, how these three can play also a role in stratification. And there's more dimensions that we may often disregard, like nationality, one's sexual orientation, right, physical ability. So the example that I often use in class is of domestic workers, domestic house workers in the United States. There's a kind of 3, maybe 4 intersections of class that we often don't recognize, whether it's gender, being female, class, being working poor, race, being non-white, and oftentimes nationality being undocumented, right? So that's an example of intersectional analysis. So what I just gave is a little tutorial of common concepts which we often find in a conflict critical perspective, and some theorists, like for instance Marx, Weber, and also feminist perspectives.